A learning disability or specific developmental disorder is a disorder that inhibits or interferes with the skills of learning. Learning disabilities are life disabilities. They are seen in children as well as adults. The impairment may be so subtle that it may go undetected throughout the life. These disabilities create a gap between the true potential and day to day productivity and performance. The same learning disabilities that interfere with reading, writing, and arithmetic interfere with cricket, football, getting dressed, keeping the room tidy, and with everyday aspects of life.
If an individual does not benefit from a regular education program and is not socially disadvantaged, intellectually limited, or pedagogically deprived, and shows no evidence for hard sign neurophysiological dysfunction, that individual is characterized as learning disabled. The child who has difficulty communicating either expressively or receptively and cannot read, write, or do mathematics within the criterion range as established per school norm is learning disabled. Individuals living with learning disabilities are socially deprived of the access to human rights, inclusion, and communication, basic facilities such as healthcare, education, and employment in general scenario.
Given the magnitude of the problem, it is important that learning disability in person must receive greater socio-economic and political attention. Through this presentation, we will introduce to you the basic understanding regarding learners with learning disabilities. We will also cover the definition, types, and the management of learning disabilities.
Definitions of learning disabilities. Learning disabilities are problems that affect the brain's ability to receive, process, analyze, or store information. Learning is acquisition of new knowledge, skills, or attitude. Children during their early years of development learn to understand the spoken language first and then learn to speak. Subsequently, during their school years, children learn to read, write, and do arithmetic according to their age and intellectual capacity. But some children may not be able to learn one or more of these skills as per their age and intellectual capacity. These problems can make it difficult for a student to learn as quickly someone who um, a student to learn as quickly as someone who isn't affected by learning disabilities. Healthy looking children who are unable to acquire age appropriate learning suffer from specific learning disability or SLD. So it seems that there are some children who, in spite of having intelligence of 90 or above, and with normal visual or physical abilities, are unable to acquire one or more age-appropriate learning. These children have the specific learning disability. So, according to the Washington Summit in 1994, um, no other disabling condition affects so many people and yet has such a low public profile and low level of understanding as SLD. Okay. So specific learning disabilities are neurologically based processing problems. These processing problems can interfere with learning basic skills such as reading, writing, math, and difficulties in motor coordination. They can also interfere with higher level skills such as organization, time planning, abstract reasoning, long or short term memory and attention. And it is important to realize that learning disabilities can affect an individual's life beyond academics and have an impact on relationship with family, friends, and in the workplace. So, another definitions of learning disabilities. Learning disabilities is an umbrella term describing a number of other more specific learning disabilities. So that's from Learning Disabilities Online, 2008. Generally speaking, people with disabilities are of average or above average intelligence. There often appears to be a gap between the individual's potential and actual achievement. This is why learning disabilities are referred to as hidden disabilities. The person looks perfectly normal and seems to be a very bright and intelligent person, yet may be unable to demonstrate the skill level expected from someone as of similar age. So, learning disabilities should not be confused with learning problems, which are primarily the result of visual, hearing, motor handicaps, mental retardation, and emotional disturbance, environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantages. Learning disabilities are lifelong. A learning disability cannot be cured or fixed, and it is a lifelong challenge. However, with appropriate support and intervention, people with learning disabilities can achieve success in school, at work, in relationships, and in the community. Students with learning disabilities have diverse, complex, and interrelated difficulties that affect their learning. While there is a great variability among students with learning disabilities, they are generally described as individuals of at least average intelligence who have difficulty processing information and who experience unexpected academic difficulties that cannot be explained based on other diagnosed disabilities or environmental influences. These students exhibit strength and success in other learning and processing areas. Although learning disabilities are lifelong, their impacts on quality of life can vary depending on demands in the environment. Causes of learning disabilities. Factors that affect the brain are many and varied, and they include the effects of damage resulting from toxic substances such as drugs, alcohol, certain minerals, early deprivation, poor nutrition, and oxygen starvation. These can affect in the prenatal and postnatal stages. So first is the prenatal and natal factors. Research has shown that a group of children with reading difficulties were products of pregnancies with complications such as toxemia, bleeding prematurity, and low birth weight. Also, maternal endocrine disorder, maternal age, reproductive readiness, radiation, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, accidents, and anoxia were also reported to be conditions that leads to learning disability. So next is the postnatal factors. So children who experienced post-birth trauma, head injury, lead poisoning causing neurological damage, seizures, chronic ear infections such as encephalitis or meningitis, and those who inhale or ingest neurotoxins, severe malnutrition, and conditions producing sustained fever may also be the factors that causes learning disabilities. Next is the genetic factors. These seem to be strong familiar factors. It is not uncommon for a parent to report that they have they have a close family um, that has learning problems. Genetic factors seem to operate in large number of cases. Next is the biochemical factors. So certain metabolic factors such as hypoglycemia and hypothyroidism are reported to be found in some children with learning disabilities. Next is the psychological factors. Children having learning disabilities tend to develop psychological problems as secondary symptoms as they are aware of the disability. Next is the experiential deprivation. Children coming from economically and culturally backward homes may exhibit some characteristics of learning disabilities. So, effects of learning disabilities. In studying skills, children are unable to change from one task to another. They have no system for organizing notes and other materials. They also have difficulty in scheduling time to complete short and long term assignments. Also, difficulty in completing tests and in class assignments without additional time, and also difficulty in following directions, particularly written directions. In interpersonal skills, we have the impulsivity. Next is the difficulty in delaying resolution to a problem. Next is the disorientation in time, misses class and appointments, and also they have poor self-esteem. Next is in reading, they have difficulty in reading new words, particularly when sound or symbol relationships are inconsistent. Next is slow reading rate. It takes longer to read a test and other in class assignments. Next is poor comprehension and retention of material read. Next is the difficulty in interpreting charts, graphs, and scientific symbols. Lastly, difficulty with complex syntax on objective tests. So in writing, they have problems in organization and sequencing of ideas, poor sentence structure, incorrect grammar, frequent and inconsistent spelling errors, difficulty in taking notes, poor letter formation, capitalization, spacing, and punctuation. And lastly, inadequate strategies for monitoring written work. And for oral language, they have the difficulty in concentrating in lectures, especially 2 to 3 hour lectures. Next is poor vocabulary. They have difficulty with word retrieval. And lastly, problems with grammar. Next is math. So the effect of learning disabilities in math is they have difficulty with basic math operations, difficulty with aligning problems, number reversals, and confusion of symbols, poor strategies for monitoring errors, difficulty with reasoning, difficulty in reading and comprehending word problems, and difficulty with concepts of time and money. So that's it for me. And to proceed our discussion, let me welcome Miss Jenny Teves.
Hi, this is Jenny Teves and I am here to discuss to you about dyslexia and dysgraphia. To further discuss to you about dyslexia, let me define to you first what it is all about. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability in children and persists throughout life. And the severity of dyslexia can vary from mild to severe. The sooner dyslexia is treated, the more favorable the outcome. However, it is never too late for people with dyslexia to learn to improve their language skills. Now, there are six types of dyslexia. First is the primary dyslexia. So, this is the most common type of dyslexia and is a dysfunction of rather than damage to the left side of the brain and does not change with age. There is variability in the severity for individuals with this type of dyslexia, and most who receive an appropriate educational intervention will be academically successful throughout their lives. Unfortunately, there are others who continue to struggle significantly with reading, writing, and spelling throughout their adult lives. Primary dyslexia is passed in family line through genes or through new genetic mutations and is found more often in boys rather than in girls. The second one is secondary or developmental dyslexia. This type of dyslexia is caused by problem with brain development during the early stages of fetal development. Secondary dyslexia diminishes as the child matures and it is also more common in boys. Trauma dyslexia. This is the third type of dyslexia that usually occurs after some form of brain trauma or injury to the area of the brain that controls reading and writing. It is rarely seen in today's school-age population. Fourth is visual dyslexia. This term is sometimes used to refer to visual processing disorder, a condition in which the brain does not properly interpret visual design or signals. So, the fifth one is auditory dyslexia. This term it had been used to refer to auditory. This is the processing disorder. So similar to visual disorder, there are problems with the brain's processing of sounds and speech. And the last one is dysgraphia. It refers to the child's difficulty holding and controlling a pencil so that the correct markings can be made on the paper. Now, what is dysgraphia? So, this is a learning disability characterized by problems with writing. It is a neurobiological disorder that can affect children or adults. In addition to writing that are difficult to read, people with dysgraphia tend to use the wrong word for what they are trying to communicate. The cause of dysgraphia isn't always known, though in adults it sometimes follows a traumatic event. Once the condition is diagnosed, you can learn strategies to help overcome some of the challenges it presents in school and in life. One of the common signs and symptoms of dysgraphia is illegible writing. But not everyone with messy penmanship has the disorder. It is also possible to have neat handwriting if you have dysgraphia, though it may take you a long time and a lot of effort to write neatly. So people with dysgraphia often have trouble concentrating on other things while writing. This can make it difficult to take notes during class or a meeting because so much attention is being paid to get each word down on paper. Other things that are said may be missed, and the students with dysgraphia may also accuse being sloppy or lazy because of their handwriting. So this can affect self-esteem and lead to anxiety, lack of confidence, and negative attitudes towards school. Now, what causes dysgraphia? So, if dysgraphia appears in childhood, it is usually the result of a problem with orthographic coding. This is an aspect of working memory that allows you to permanently remember written words and the way your hands or fingers must move to write those words. With dysgraphia, kids or adults have a harder time planning and executing the writing of sentences, words, and even individual letters. It is not that you don't know how to read, spell, or identify letters and words. Instead, your brain has problems processing words and writing. When dysgraphia develops in adults, the cause is usually a stroke or other brain injury. In particular, injury to the brain's left parietal lobe may lead to dysgraphia. You have a right and left parietal lobe in the upper part of your brain. Each is associated with a range of skills, such as reading and writing, as well as sensory processing, including pain, heat, and cold. People get confused about dyslexia and dysgraphia because sometimes these conditions vary for one another. So dyslexia is a reading disorder and dysgraphia is a writing disorder. But people with dyslexia may also have problems with their writing and spelling. It is possible to have both learning disabilities, but it is important to get a proper diagnosis so you know if one or both conditions require attention. That would be all from my topics. Thank you for listening.
Does anyone know about dyscalculia? Dyscalculia is a specific learning disability that affects a person's ability to understand numbers and learn math facts. Dyscalculia is a specific learning difficulty in mathematics. Like dyslexia, dyscalculia can cause a visual perceptual deficit. Dyscalculia refers specifically to the inability to perform operations in mathematics or arithmetic. It could be described as an extreme difficulty with numbers. Dyscalculia doesn't have the same stigma surrounding it, but it is very important to recognize it as soon as possible before it impacts the child's self-esteem. Just as there is no single set of signs that characterize all dyslexies, there is no cause of dyscalculia. Dyscalculia comes from the Greek word dys, meaning difficulty with, and calculia, meaning calculations. So here are some signs and symptoms of dyscalculia. Shows difficulty understanding concepts of place value and quantity, number lines, positive and negative value, carrying and borrowing. Has difficulty understanding and doing word problems. Has difficulty sequencing information or events. Exhibits difficulty using steps involved in math operations. Shows difficulty understanding fractions. Is challenged making change and handling money. Displays difficulty recognizing patterns when adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Has difficulty putting language to math processes. Has difficulty understanding concepts related to time, such as days, weeks, months, seasons, quarter, and etc. Exhibits difficulty organizing problems on the page, keeping numbers lined up, following through on long division problems. So there are still strategies for intervention on dyscalculia. Allow use of fingers and scratch paper. Use diagrams and draw math concepts. Provide peer assistance. Suggest use of graph papers. Suggest use of colored pencils to differentiate problems. Work with manipulative. Draw pictures of word problems. Use mnemonic devices to learn steps of a math concept. Use the rhythm and music to teach math facts and to set up steps to a beat. Schedule computer time for students for drills and practice. So let's move on to another learning disability, which is dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a specific motor difficulty, refers to problems with movements and coordination, whether it is fine motor skills or gross motor skills. Dyspraxia is also called as developmental dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder. It is not certain what causes dyspraxia, but it is thought to be due to an immaturity in neuron development in the brain. Dyspraxia affects approximately 10% of the population, and some are severely affected. The overwhelming majority are males. Like dyslexia and dyscalculia, the extent to which people are affected varies tremendously. Some people may be only affected slightly, and others are affected more seriously. Some developmental milestones are delayed, and there might be speech difficulties, and this does not surprisingly lead to difficulties at school. Oftentimes, these problems are accompanied by difficulties in vision and movement. The medical journal defines dyspraxia as a serious impairment in the development of the motor or movement coordination that can be explained or solely in terms of mental retardation or any other specific inherited or acquired neurological disorder. There is yet no known treatment for dyspraxia. Regular physiotherapy or occupational therapy may improve motor and coordination skills. Although the term dyspraxia is most often used in education, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association uses the term developmental coordination disorder and offers five criteria for diagnosis. First, there is a marked impairment in the developmental of motor coordination. Second, the impairment significantly interferes with academic achievement or activities of daily living. Third, the coordination difficulties are not due to a general medical condition. Fourth, it is not a pervasive developmental disorder. And lastly, if developmental delay is evident, the motor difficulties are in excess of those usually associated with it. So here are some strategies for intervention on dyspraxia. Preset students for touch with verbal prompts. So for example, you will say, I'm going to touch your right hand. Avoid touching from behind or getting too close and make sure peers are aware of this. Provide a quiet place without auditory or visual distractions for testing, silent reading, or work that requires great concentration. Warn students when bells will ring or if a fire drill is scheduled. Whisper when working one-to-one with the child. Allow parents to provide earplugs or sterile waxes for noisy events such as assemblies. Make sure the parents know what is observed about the students in the classroom. Refer students for occupational therapy or sensory integration training. Be cognizant of light and light source that may be irritating to child. Use manipulative but make sure they are in students' field of vision and don't force students to touch them. And that's all for dyscalculia and dyspraxia.